For decades, the international community held on to a quiet optimism that Pakistan, despite its instability, would eventually find a path to recovery. But as we step into the middle of this decade, that optimism has all but vanished. The collapse is no longer coming, it's here. And more critically, it's no longer reversible. This isn't hyperbole, it's a quiet consensus among those who track global economic health, strategic risk, and regional development. The warning signs have been visible for years, but now the structural cracks have become systemic failures, woven into the very institutions that once held the country together. To understand why Pakistan's economic collapse is now considered irreversible, we must first examine the deeper layers, not just the debt or inflation, but the architecture of dysfunction, the political paralysis, military dominance, and chronic dependency that have hardened over time. Let's start with the numbers. In 2025, Pakistan's external debt crossed $130 billion. Servicing this debt now consumes more than half of the government's revenue. Foreign reserves continue to hover near default thresholds, barely enough to cover 6 weeks of imports. Inflation is not just high, it is unmanageable. Energy costs have surged, subsidies have vanished, and the average Pakistani can no longer afford basic essentials. But the crisis is not merely economic, it is institutional. Pakistan's state has become a machine without oil. The civilian government lacks legitimacy. The military operates as a parallel power, absorbing national resources, dictating foreign policy, and undermining democratic accountability. Elections, when they occur, are treated as theater. Real decisions are made behind closed doors by unelected generals. This model may offer short-term control, but it guarantees long-term stagnation. Unlike nations that faced collapse but adapted, like Argentina or Greece, Pakistan lacks the institutional agility to correct course. The very forces causing the collapse are also blocking the solutions. There is no serious movement toward economic liberalization, no push for civil reform, no genuine devolution of power. In contrast, just across the border, India has turned its institutional reforms into engines of growth. While Pakistan struggles to attract even emergency IMF tranches, India is hosting global investment summits, attracting billions in FDI, and building a reputation as a trusted partner for Western and Eastern powers alike. Pakistan, meanwhile, has become a risk too large to ignore and too broken to fix. And here lies the critical point: the collapse is not a sudden fall. It is a controlled descent into irrelevance, disguised as resilience. One of the least acknowledged yet most damaging realities of Pakistan's collapse is the role played by its own military. While many countries suffer from corrupt elites, in Pakistan the line between state and military has completely dissolved. The army is not simply a defense institution, it is the largest political party, the dominant economic conglomerate, and the final authority on all matters of national significance. It controls ports, housing projects, agribusiness, and industrial zones. It owns banks, media outlets, and even real estate firms, and all of this operates under the illusion of national interest. But the consequence is this: no economy can thrive when one sector consumes all oxygen. Private business cannot flourish under shadow monopolies. Civilian governments cannot plan long-term reforms when generals change prime ministers like pieces on a chessboard, and international investors, especially those from the West, view this military-commercial complex as a structural red flag. The world no longer sees Pakistan as unstable but salvageable. It sees it as structurally frozen. On the foreign front, Pakistan's isolation is deepening. Relations with the United States remain transactional at best. China, once the country's most vocal backer, is quietly retreating. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, once celebrated as a $60 billion game-changer, has stalled. Projects are delayed, Chinese workers are pulling out, and Beijing has grown wary of throwing good money after bad. Meanwhile, Pakistan has alienated its neighbors. Tensions with India are a permanent fixture, but even ties with Iran and Afghanistan remain tense and unstable. No major regional alliance is holding. No global economic corridor passes through Pakistan anymore. It is increasingly a country no one wants to depend on or invest in. And what's most alarming is the internal unraveling. Provinces like Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa are not merely underdeveloped, they are ungoverned. Separatist movements grow stronger, targeted violence is rising, ethnic grievances are deepening. In the absence of economic opportunity or national cohesion, radicalization thrives. No state can survive when half its geography functions outside its control, and yet instead of political inclusion or reconciliation, the state doubles down on suppression, treating dissent as treason and treating every crisis as a security threat. But economic collapse is not a security issue, it is a systemic decay. Compare this to India, where federalism, though imperfect, remains functional. States compete for investment, political instability exists, yes, but it is managed through elections, not interventions. Institutions, for all their flaws, are strong enough to check power, enable growth, and absorb shocks. Pakistan, by contrast, is operating with hollowed-out institutions and a silenced population. There is no feedback loop, no capacity for correction. This is why the collapse is not just underway, it is locked in, and foreign powers know it. When a nation begins surviving on borrowed time and borrowed money, it stops being sovereign in the economic sense. Pakistan is now in its 24th program with the International Monetary Fund, a staggering cycle of short-term loans, temporary relief, and long-term dependency. Each bailout comes with promises of reform, austerity measures, and structural adjustment, but the reforms never last. The political will vanishes, and the cycle resets. This is not recovery, this is repetition, and with each repetition the country loses credibility. International investors watch this pattern and step back. Credit ratings drop, foreign direct investment dries up. The perception becomes reality. Pakistan is not a place to build, only a place to bail out. More critically, the country lacks what every modern economy depends on, a productive industrial base. While India became a hub for tech, pharmaceuticals, and digital services, Pakistan failed to move beyond textiles and remittances. Its exports have stagnated, its manufacturing has declined, and rather than investing in value creation, the elite focused on real estate, speculation, and rent-seeking behavior. In the meantime, its population continues to explode, now approaching 250 million, with over 60% under the age of 30. This could be a demographic dividend, but in Pakistan's case, it is a demographic time bomb. Jobs are not being created fast enough, education systems are failing, infrastructure is collapsing, and millions of young people are entering adulthood with no prospects, no training, and no trust in their government. What happens when a generation grows up with only anger and hopelessness? We are already seeing the answer: extremism, migration, radicalization, mass disillusionment. The best minds, doctors, engineers, entrepreneurs, are leaving. The brain drain is accelerating. Pakistan is hemorrhaging talent at the exact moment it needs it most. Meanwhile, its digital infrastructure is throttled by censorship. Its currency is in freefall, and its leadership is focused on surviving the next month, not planning for the next decade. Compare this again to India. India embraced its youth, it opened its economy, it invited global capital, and now it exports software, satellites, and startups. Pakistan, in contrast, exports crisis. And here lies the final tragedy. Pakistan is not dying from a single blow. It is dying from institutional suffocation and strategic paralysis. Not one choice, but thousands, each made for the short term, each avoiding real reform, each deferring collapse by one more week. Now there are no more weeks left. At this point, some still ask, can't Pakistan be saved? Isn't there still a chance for reform, recovery, or reinvention? But the harsh truth is this: collapse is not always sudden. Sometimes it becomes irreversible long before anyone calls it by name. Pakistan's crisis is no longer just economic, it is existential. It is a crisis of trust, where no citizen believes in the system. It is a crisis of legitimacy, where elections change nothing, and those in power are not chosen, but appointed. It is a crisis of direction, where the state no longer knows what it stands for, only what it opposes, and when a nation forgets its own purpose, it begins to dissolve. What we are witnessing now is not just the decay of an economy, but the disintegration of a functioning state, and the world has noticed. Western powers have quietly reduced diplomatic risk in Islamabad. Foreign missions are shrinking, long-term trade discussions are off the table, Development organizations are focused not on growth, but on humanitarian stabilization. The conversation has shifted from aid to containment. Even China, long considered Pakistan's economic lifeline, is reassessing. Belt and road investments are being redirected. Military partnerships remain, but economic confidence is gone. And India, once seen only through the lens of rivalry, is now part of the solution, not the problem. New Delhi is positioning itself as a stabilizing force in South Asia. It is building global alliances, managing regional conflicts, and offering the West a reliable partner in a dangerous neighborhood. While Pakistan shrinks, India rises, not because one wished it, but because one prepared. India invested in institutions, in education, in a digital ecosystem, in a civil-military balance. It built trust, not just among its people, but among the world's powers. That trust is what Pakistan lacks most, because without trust, no investor comes. Without trust, no reform lasts. Without trust, no society holds. So what now? The answer is already taking shape. Quietly, international powers are planning for a Pakistan that is no longer stable, and perhaps no longer governable in the traditional sense. Border controls are tightening, intelligence sharing is increasing, refugee contingencies are being reviewed, and regional balances are shifting permanently. In the end, Pakistan's collapse is not a matter of if, but a matter of how the world manages the aftermath. And in that future, India is no longer just Pakistan's rival, it is the region's anchor. History does not pause for those who fall behind, it moves forward with those who are ready, and Pakistan tragically has already been left behind.